The numbers that sealed New South Wales' fate.
Overnight, New South Wales had 27 cases of community transmission. Unfortunately, only 13 of those were already in isolation.
Lockdown extended for Greater Sydney until midnight next Friday.
This Delta strain is a game changer. It's extremely transmissible.
Case numbers are rising sharply in 3 LGAs: Fairfield, Canterbury, Bankstown and Liverpool. Authorities singling out people in those areas.
Please don't mingle with family. Don't think it's okay to go and visit your cousins. Please stay at home. Please do not leave the house.
I can't tell you, as Health Minister, just how critical it is at the moment.
So critical, tougher lockdown measures are being threatened.
The next step could be limiting even further movement through the health orders.
Hospitalisation rates among young people are worryingly high.
Of that total 37, 8 are under the age of 35. Of the 7 people in ICU, 1 is in their 30s. A bit of a wake-up call to young people.
Also today, the news parents were dreading. While regional students can head back to the classroom, Greater Sydney schools will move to remote learning.
We need to stop literally hundreds of thousands of adults moving around and interacting with each other inadvertently as they drop kids off, pick kids up.
And for businesses looking for answers,
most you're offering is $10,000 cash, and you're mandating that they shut.
The promise of a roadmap out of lockdown in the coming days, but no certainty there'll be any more cash.
Look, there's always opportunities for us to consider what more we can do.
Only hopes that this lockdown will be the last.
We want to make sure that when we exit the lockdown, we have the best chance of not having to go into lockdown again.
Bill Bertel is a Strategic Health Policy Advisor at NSW and joins us now. Bill, another week, and based on the numbers we're seeing at the moment, do you think that will be enough?
Well, it's in the hands of everybody in Sydney who's been at or near an exposure site or who has the slightest symptoms to go and get tested. That'll decide whether this goes on for another week or even longer. It's really up to those people now. The numbers evidently are going to be a little worse tomorrow, according to the Premier today. So let's hope for the best, but I think we've got a plan for maybe even a lockdown that will go longer.
Well, Sydney is in lockdown, but there are still some shops that you wouldn't necessarily deem as essential open. Do you think a stricter lockdown needs to come into play?
Yes, of course. We should have gone into a lockdown 2 or 3, 4 days after the initial case was detected through the poor quarantine at Sydney Airport. Should have followed the model that Melbourne knows very well, and Brisbane and Perth. We would have been quicker into it, and if we had then clobbered the virus, we'd be quicker out of it. Now, you can't have a lockdown light in these situations. What's happening is many retailers are open, but a lot of small businesses are not, and this is creating a great degree of what you call confusion. It can't be put back onto the people and the business owners to try to decipher whether they should be open or shut. If they're going to shut, they need really substantial economic income support to compensate them for what they have to do in the community interest.
You say they should have locked down sooner. Brad Hazzard says a lack of vaccine supply is the reason Sydney's in this situation. They're also blaming people for not doing the right thing and following the rules. Are they just shirking responsibility here? Well,
They're very good at pointing the finger at everybody but themselves. Now, the responsibilities are clear. New South Wales ran a very lax quarantine system at Sydney Airport, and of course the other responsibility has to be sheeted home to the Australian government, who declined a year ago to order the vaccines that if we'd had them at the beginning of this year, we would be 70 or 80% fully vaccinated by now. And then we'd be dealing with a very different situation in Sydney.
Bill, Brad Hazzard also said this today.
At some stage, if the individuals that we need don't hear Dr. Chan's message, then at some point we're going to move to a stage where we're going to have to accept that the virus has a life which will continue in the community.
Now, the minister might have been just putting a threat out to the community to try to, force them into better behaviour. But if that was to play out, what are the ramifications of that?
Well, that's an enormous threat. That's a huge change from policy. A couple of times in the last week or so, the Premier has made it very clear that the objective of this lockdown is to go back to zero COVID. And today we've had Brad Hazzard and then reported in the media the Treasurer of New South Wales both deciding that an alternative might be to live with COVID along the extremely radical lines now being adopted in the United Kingdom. Well, there is no modelling available to us to say, well, how many cases or hospitalisations or even deaths might result from living with COVID in New South Wales. It is really the most extraordinary thing that the Minister for Health and the Treasurer could say. And so I think people in New South Wales have every right to say what is going on. What is the objective of this lockdown? And to conjure up threats that if you don't do what we say, we'll let COVID run. I mean, really, have we really come to this? Now, I fully support the Premier and the Chief Medical Officer in saying the objective of this is zero COVID. If the Minister for Health and the Treasurer and other people have a different idea, then let them say it out loud and bring forth the evidence. But don't do it without the approval of the people of New South Wales and the Parliament of New South Wales. And then let's see what happens.
You don't think he was just saying that the objective is zero COVID, but if people don't comply with the rules, then that's going to be unrealisable. That's just impossible if people don't comply.
What on earth would possess the Minister for Health to say such a thing or give him the right to determine that for the people of New South Wales?
Yeah.
There are over 250 people who have got a diagnosis of COVID in New South Wales today. There are 30 or 40 people in hospital, and some of those are in ICU and on ventilators. That's what living with COVID does. That's what taking your time to lock down does. Is that the future, really, that we're being threatened with?
Bill, all the best for the remainder of the lockdown, however long that ends up being for people in Sydney. Thanks very much for your time tonight.
Thank you.
I'm confused when he's saying there about making decisions without the approval of the people. When have we ever had a say? I didn't realise that it was a vote on what kind of decision-making we want in the whole pandemic.
Yeah.
Has it ever been like that? Did I miss something?
I don't think we have. And maybe that's actually worked out well up to this point.
Yeah, trying to get us all to agree would be interesting.
Yeah. But I mean, I think his criticism of Brad Hazzard is right in that it was a weird thing to say. Like, I know he was responding to a question, he didn't raise it, but it was a weird thing to say. But I still think the strategy of New South Wales is clear. I think they're going for zero. Just they're doing it in a way that might take a little while.
Yeah, I mean, is it? And Rach, is it? Yeah, you're in Sydney. Is it the optics of like the idea of do the right thing working when the shop's open? It's like you've got 4 reasons to go out, but the shops are open. There's no limit of how far you can go, the amount of people you can exercise. Well, there's 10 you can exercise with.
Yeah, and people are in lockdown, they're feeling isolated. If the shop's open, they're like, I don't think I can go, but it's open, and they wouldn't be open if I wasn't allowed to go. And so all of a sudden you're asking people like, I'm not going anywhere, I'm not moving. But a lot of people are just like, oh, well, if that's open, that surely must mean that it's okay, So I feel like in these situations as a government, you just have to be black and white. You're like, this is shut and that is it, and you cannot do anything. You can't keep putting it in the hands of the people, because there are going to be people that don't do the right thing, and then we're all stuck in lockdown.
Rach, can I ask you about the politics of this thing? Because obviously all along Gladys Berejiklian's kind of been the one who will do the least that needs to be done, right? They just only what has to be done and nothing more, and has clearly calculated that that's what Sydney-siders want. They want the maximum level of freedom. Now that you're living through this lockdown, I'm going to make you speak for everyone in Sydney. Do you think that's where Sydney-siders are? Or do you think they would actually like to see something stricter now?
Yeah, well, I can only speak for myself, but I've always felt a bit on the wrong side of these people that are being spoken to. Like, I feel like we're being treated like delicate flowers who couldn't possibly deal with a lockdown, when in reality we're just like, we don't want to go into a lockdown that continually gets extended because we're hemming and hawing about where we should be. Like, I think everybody understands we're in the middle of a pandemic. If something is going wrong, shut us the hell down and get us back to normal as soon as you possibly can. Like, I don't think there's anything unreasonable in that. So I've always been a bit surprised at this hesitation about being very black and white in Sydney, because I get this pushback, but you have to take the pushback to get a better result.
From expert opinions to in-depth analysis and reporting, the Project YouTube brings you the biggest stories from Australia and around the globe. Hit the subscribe button now for news delivered straight to your feed.